News about this year's race for governor continues to trickle in week by week. Former DOTD Secretary Sean Wilson announced he will run. He becomes the first Democrat to enter the field. Garrett Graves announced he would not, which means it could open the door for business and industry leader Stephen Waguespack from Lobby to run. One of the state's top pollsters, John Couvillon from JMC Analytics, is here, and you've got some observations about where we stand right now.
Yes. So what's interesting about the race, you have to think of it in terms of there being three demographic swim lanes. The first demographic swim lane would be the Democratic swim lane, so to speak. Sean Wilson not only occupies it, but he dominates it. Right. And I think it's highly unlikely that he would be sharing that swim lane with any other Democrat, because Governor Edwards and his people have clearly established that Sean Wilson is the preferred candidate. What that means in plain terms is he's pretty much a lock for the runoff, because on a bad day, a Democrat will get 40% of the vote in this state. Even in a crowded field, I could see Sean finishing first in the field with 30 to 35%. So that's swim lane number one. Okay. Swim lane number two is what I would describe as the conservative Republican swim lane. That is where Jeff Landry, the state's attorney general, currently dominates. And he does have some competition from State Senator Sharon Hewitt and from State Treasurer John Schroeder. But right now, when you're talking about someone who has more than $5 million in the bank, I would expect that he would have a dominant position. Sure. Does it guarantee him the other runoff spot? That brings me to swim lane number three, which is what I would describe as the more moderate Republican swim lane, which in the old days would have been described as the Dave Treen wing. I'm talking about Republicans who are more interested in economic issues as opposed to being animated by social issues. And these Republicans primarily reside in the larger parishes in southeast Louisiana, such as southern East Baton Rouge Parish, the East Bank of Jefferson Parish, St. Tammany Parish, places like that. These are demographic areas, or groups rather, that gave John Bel Edwards just enough of their vote in 2015 and 2019 to elect and re-elect him. But on almost every other race, these voters voted Republican up and down, whether you're talking about the other statewide races, the legislature, parish-wide races, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what's interesting about that third swim lane is they don't currently have a candidate. Kind of, sort of, Richard Nelson could fit the profile. He's running on a more libertarianish kind of platform. But the interesting question right now is, if we were to have a Stephen Waguespack entry as the chair of the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, that perfectly fits that profile of the pro-business Republican who could then be competitive against Jeff Landry for that second spot in the runoff. And
there's been a push by moderate Republicans for someone who fits that signature to enter the race.
Correct. The concern from this faction of the Republican Party is they don't want Jeff Landry to be the only dominant Republican figure. Right. They want some competition. And being head of the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, even if he's not yet a household name amongst the average Louisiana voter, the most important thing is he has the ability to obtain funding. And funding is what would be necessary for that candidate to be the Republican opponent to Sean Wilson in November.
When you look at down the road, say 3 months, where would you envision things shaping up?
Over the next
are there other surprises that could enter still?
Anything's possible in politics is my attitude, but I also think that the unique dynamic you have in the governor's race is, given the amount of money it takes just to be competitive, the door is steadily closing shut right now, because donors are not going to sit around and wait until qualifying to see who to get behind. Right. They're making their preferences known now. So right now, what I would describe as the donor primary is what's occurring over the next few months. Then once we get into the summer months, that's when you have the real campaigning in terms of any kind of events, any kind of TV advertising or digital advertising or mail or whatnot. But that's really not going to occur until later in the summer, because right now the name of the game is raising enough money and or showing good numbers on your campaign finance reports.
And all we've seen so far is just people who may run or were definitely going to run or say they're in it, but there's not been any campaigning at all yet.
Correct. Minimal campaigning other than, say, speeches to certain industry groups. But in terms of, I guess, being seen widely by voters, that's not going to occur until the summer and the fall.
When might we see some polls come out?
Well, I would say that there's going to be polls sprinkled throughout. I would expect the polling volume would grow exponentially once we get into September and October.
Okay, we'll wait for that.
Well, for one thing, we have to have qualifying finish for
Sure.
to have an official candidate list, but I would expect polling to be sporadic in the short term, and it would grow as we get into the fall.
All right, we'll wait and see. John, thanks so much. Appreciate you being here.
Yes.